Have you ever walked out of a meeting and thought, I handled that badly? Maybe you got defensive. Maybe you spoke too fast. Maybe you shut down. You went vague. You tried to control the room. And the strange thing is, you probably knew better. That's the frustrating part of leadership, isn't it? Probably the frustrating part of being human. It's not usually a lack of intelligence. It's not even a lack of experience. It's that in the moment, in the real moment, when there's pressure, challenge, ego, uncertainty, we don't always lead from our best self. We lead from habit. And that is why self-awareness matters so much, because self-awareness is not just about knowing yourself in some abstract, reflective, end of the day kind of way. It's about being aware enough in real time to notice what's happening inside you before it takes over your behavior. That's what this video is about. In the last video, I introduced the 5 dimensions of leadership and the 5 capabilities that sit underneath them. And I said that leadership maturity is not just about what you do, it's about the inner capabilities that matter what you do under pressure. Today, we begin with the first dimension, self-awareness. And honestly, this is where leadership begins. Hello, I'm Pietro Pazzi. I spent 30 years as an executive in global leadership roles. I've seen brilliant leaders burn out, lose themselves, or hit an invisible ceiling. I realized that what was missing wasn't more strategy or tactics, it was depth, and depth work on their inner operating system. So I returned to my roots in psychosynthesis, and now I help leaders integrate their inner world with their leadership impact. The purpose of LD1 is simple: to develop reflective awareness and centeredness so leadership is less reactive, more congruent, and more intentional in real time. And I really want to slow that down because there's a lot packed into it. Less reactive, more congruent, more intentional. That means I'm not just being run by my mood, my fear, my need to be right, or my need to look good. It means there's a bit of space between what happens to me and how I choose to respond. And that space changes everything, because leadership is full of moments that pull us off center. Someone challenges our ideas. A team member disappoints us. A board meeting gets tense. A decision has to be made with incomplete information. A colleague says something that touches a nerve. In those moments, self-awareness is what happens. And a leader notices, I'm getting defensive. I'm speeding up. I'm trying to control things. I've stopped listening. I'm telling myself a story and I'm acting as if it's fact. That kind of awareness is gold, not because it makes you perfect, it won't, but because it gives you a chance to choose differently. In this model, each leadership dimension is shaped by a different capability mix. For LD1, self-awareness, 2 capabilities do most of the heavy lifting. The first is grounding. Grounding is about centeredness, congruence, reflective awareness, and having the internal North Star that keeps you values-led under pressure. And I love that phrase, internal North Star, because without it, leadership becomes very externally driven. You start reacting to approval, politics, status, urgency, or fear. You become led by the room rather than by what really matters to you. A grounded leader can feel pressure without becoming pressure. They can stay connected to themselves even when the environment is noisy. The secondary primary capability is sensemaking. This is about discernment. It's the ability to notice your own narrative and assumptions, to separate facts from the story you're adding, to shift viewpoint and see more than one interpretation. This is such an important leadership move because Most of us don't react to reality. We react to the meaning we've made of reality. A colleague goes quiet in the meeting and I tell myself, they're disengaged. Someone questions me and I decide, they don't respect me. A decision gets delayed and I conclude the team simply lacks commitment. Maybe, but maybe not. Sensemaking helps a leader pause and ask, what are the facts? What story am I adding? What else might be true? And then there's the secondary overlap called a delivery. This one is easy to miss because it matters. Because self-awareness is not just only about insight, it also requires a small act of courage in the moment. The courage to pause, the courage to admit, what's happening? The courage to choose differently. That is where awareness becomes leadership. A leader who is strong in LD1, self-awareness, typically does a few very recognizable things. They notice tension, defensiveness, urgency, or control impulse early enough to respond intentionally. That bit matters early enough, not 2 hours later, not in the car on the way home, not while you're replaying the meeting in bed that night, early enough to actually shift something. They separate observable facts from interpretation. They don't confuse I felt dismissed with I was dismissed. They know the difference between what happened and the story forming in their head. They act from an internal North Star rather than fear, approval seeking, or status protection. So even when it's inconvenient, and this is where it gets tested, they stay connected to their values. They demonstrate congruence. Their behavior matches what they say matters. They show curiosity when challenged, rather than sliding straight into justification. That one alone is such a powerful signal of maturity. When someone questions you, do you become a courtroom lawyer defending yourself, or can you get genuinely curious? They can name their patterns in the moment, something like, I can feel myself getting defensive. I'm becoming unclear. I need a second to reset. That's not weakness, that's leadership with awareness. And finally, they can use reflection to create behavioral change, not just insight. Because insight on its own is lovely, but limited. A lot of people are brilliantly reflective after the event. They can explain exactly why they did what they did. They can name the childhood trigger, the ego bruise, the pattern, the attachment, the shadow, the whole lot. And then they do the same thing again next Tuesday. Real self-awareness has to translate into behavior. When self-awareness is underdeveloped, a few patterns usually show up. The first is this phrase, I realized afterwards. I hear this a lot. I realized afterwards that I was shutting him down. I realized afterwards that I was coming across as impatient. I realized afterwards that I'd already made up my mind. Now, to be fair, that kind of reflection is better than no reflection. It's a start. But if it keeps happening and nothing changes, then awareness is arriving too late. Another pattern is defensive explanation, rationalization, or blame shifting. The leader doesn't really examine their part. They explain it away. They justify the tone. They blame the pressure. They point to the team. They talk a lot, but they don't actually own it. Then there's emotional leakage, and this one is subtle but common. A leader says, no, I'm fine. But their tone says otherwise. Their face tightens. Their impatience leaks out. Their withdrawal leaks out. Their sarcasm leaks out. And then everyone else in the room manages around their emotional state. That is very expensive leadership. But perhaps the most frustrating failure pattern of all is insight without behavior change. The leader understands themselves beautifully even, but doesn't translate insight into new response. The gap between knowing and doing is where growth gets stuck. So self-awareness is not soft, it is not indulgent, and it is definitely not optional. It is the foundation of intentional leadership. Because when a leader becomes more aware, they become less driven by habit, less controlled by reactivity, and more able to choose a response that is aligned, grounded, and useful. That is where mature leadership begins. In the next video, we'll move to LD2, Impact Awareness, how your leadership lands on other people, and why trust, candor, and relational intelligence matter far more than most leaders realize. If this perspective speaks to you and you want to develop your leadership from the inside out, explore my leadership depth coaching at pietropazi.com. You can also book a 30-minute complimentary exploratory chat with me. You'll find both links in the description. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.